the pressure to look for forward progress hampers our understanding of, I think, the imaginative work of white supremacy, the way that it reinvents itself.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And you make this point. You make this point so powerfully, right? That the way in which we often invoke history in these moments arrest the imagination. Say a little bit more about that.
No, I mean, I and I've gotten in trouble
at
various moments for saying this, but I don't know that, I don't think, and I understand there's some very prominent, brilliant, important thinkers. So I'm not attacking them, but I don't think it's particularly useful to talk about mass incarceration as Jim Crow or slavery. I don't think they're this, and part of the reason is that when we do that, we're less attentive to the mechanisms for the ways in which they control and produce suffering, and also less attentive to the ways in which we might avoid them or respond to them. Right? And so it's not, so I know that people like to think in terms of analogies. People like anniversaries, people like analogies. It helps, right? It's a kind of
intellectual shorthand.
Yes, intellectual shorthand. It's kind of that bounded rationality. People can make it, but I do think that it has the side effect of people say, it's all the same. But when you say it's all the same, you actually don't fully know what's going on, right? You don't fully know what's going on. Incarceration is a horrifying tool for managing poverty and labor. It has its own logics, right? That I think need to be talked about on their own terms. So for me, it's things like that's it. Why I resist that. It's all the same kind of account.
Yeah.
And it also is different. And I guess it's also like you think about what it means to be that we are literate, and people incarcerated are literate, and we have there's so much, there is oppression, but there are also all of these tools at our disposal and all of this history and tradition at our disposal that I hate the idea of dismissing all of that abundance.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. How does one strike the delicate balance between a kind of piety towards the past and an irreverent orientation toward it, so that you might release yourself,
talk about that.
so that you might release yourself into a different kind of imagining, that kind of relationship. What do you think about that?
Oh, I was going to ask you. I mean, I think it's hard, right? Especially because, we have these, we have lived under the shadow of the greatest generation, which for Black folks is maybe not the World War II generation, but the Civil Rights Movement generation,
exactly.
Right? They're our greatest generation, and they are always telling us what they did and how they did it. And what's fascinating is when you're around them and you're like, how y'all are disorganized? How did y'all do all that?
We were raised by it. We're not millennials. We were raised by it.
We were raised by it, right? And
right.
And they were, extraordinary. But I also think the world was we are in a completely different circumstance,
right? In
so many different ways. The political economy is different,
right?
Politics are, the major parties have taken different positions. The relationship to the rest of the world, we are in a kind of weirdly post and neo-colonial world, different from the decolonizing world. Social media is different. Media, it's a media consolidation. So much is different that I think we can't. So for me, the funny example is always, and I say this all the time, is every time, there's infighting. This is more when millennials are fighting with each other politically, millennial organizers. They'll be like, so-and-so is an agent. It's an FBI agent. And you're like, we don't need that anymore. There's surveillance over everything. You don't need any people infiltrating. People can see everything on your phone, right? Like because they're using old-fashioned frames of reference. We have to be more sophisticated, even as we can learn from their. I think what we learn from is that their observation, like with Bob Moses, right? When he talked about, he was such a careful observer. And then tried to figure out, okay, how do you negotiate with these four? That to me is the lesson, not to repeat the same strategy. Right?
Yeah, and I think I take it to an even more personal level.
Yeah.
So at the level of politics, right? You're absolutely right. Right, that there's a certain way history can be invoked, particularly the civil rights, the mid-20th century, which is historically is an anomaly. Yeah. It doesn't historically, the mid-20th century.
It's different from other. Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense. And when you think about the arc of American history, right? It's just so unique and unusual on so many levels. But it becomes the norm in some ways. It becomes the standard by which one thinks about movement and thinks about struggle, right? It's like thinking about the Warren Court as representative of the Supreme Court. Makes no sense given the role of the court. It doesn't make any sense, right? So to think about it personally, though, what does it mean for us to have been born under the shadow of the greatest generation, right? Like I have my goatee as a symbol, as a homage to Malcolm, right? I wish, I'm born out of place and time. If I was belatedness, right? Yes. If I was in the 1960s, I would have been standing post with Malcolm, serving breakfast with the Black Panther Party. I would have been, yes. I would have been, in the midst of it all, right? But no, I've come of age in the age of Reagan, right? And so what does it mean to kind of feel this sense of belatedness, this longing, right? And then find yourself in a posture of imitation, in a posture of supplication
to them. Yeah.
To them. And then what happens to your imagination in that space? Then suddenly, the only thing you start doing is just we're gonna march. I'm gonna,
marching thing.
This marching. Or I'm gonna, what I remember when I was younger and I was doing public speaking, I had the rhythm of Malcolm. I could do it. I could get going. How would he say? Who are they to compare yourself to? Why your hair looks like gold next to their head. Why your skin, your skin looks like gold next. Why would you want to be compared to that stringy head thing, right? So rhetorically, you find yourself in that space, and what happens is the imagination is arrested. Yeah. And so the particularity of your moment is obscured because you're too busy giving yourself over, committing suicide by way of imitation.
Ooh.
Right?
And that's a word.
That's Emerson. Right?